Welcome, everyone. I want to let you know, just for the purposes of recording, that we are, in fact, recording on a bunch of different levels. And so that means both that we're watching you and also that you don't need to take furious notes on this. Slides and our faces will be available either pretty soon or shortly enough. And so this is Success in Small Churches, Hope in Unitarian Universalism's Heartland. I am Reverend Megan Foley. I work for UUA Congregational Life Staff. I will soon be the regional lead for the Central East region, which is the region that you're in right now. And I'd like to introduce Karen Bellavance-Grace, who also works for Congregational Life Staff in the New England region, and Darcy Hall, who is our awesome congregational representative from Orange, New Jersey, and we'll talk about Orange's story in a little while. But first, she's going to kick us off with some opening words.
We light this chalice to affirm that new light is ever waiting to break through to enlighten our ways. That new truth is ever waiting to break through to illumine our minds. And that new love is ever waiting to break through to warm our hearts. May we be open to this light and to the rich possibilities that it brings us as we travel through our work today and every day.
Okay, so we're going to be doing some jumping up and down with the microphone, but bear with us. Let's see who else is in the room with us today. By show of hands, how many of you are from a congregation of less than 50 people? Wow, look at you all. Great. How about 50 to 100 people? All right. More than 100 people? Wow, it's pretty evenly split. Interesting. How many of you come from a congregation that has a full-time minister? Wow. Terrific. That's more than I expected. That's great. How about a part-time minister? Okay. And how many of you are from lay-led congregations? Wow, a whole bunch. Good to see you all. Oh, that's right. People getting the audio recording are not going to know how many of your hands were up. They'll just hear me say, wow, cool. Okay, whose congregation is younger than 50 years old? Wow, there's a whole lot of you. That's great. How about a congregation that is about 100 years old? More than 100 years old? Who thinks they have the oldest congregation in the room? Founding year? 135? Anyone more than 135? 180? 226? I hear 300. Do I have 350? All right, that's great. Well, thank you all for showing up and representing your congregations here. We're really excited that you're here and with us, and we're looking forward to talking with you more after if you have more questions. Megan?
It's like a file up here. Thanks. We want to start with a little bit of why I do this work, why Karen does this work, why we're interested in this work. And the reason why I do this work with small churches comes from the experience I had serving a small church, a very adorable and beloved small church outside of Washington, D.C. called Sugarloaf Congregation of Unitarian Universalists, which is a congregation of about perennially 100 members, no matter what ever happens. Come hell or high water, 100 members. That I served half-time for 6 years. So I came out of seminary looking for a certain kind of church that did the kind of work that I thought church ought to be. So a real sense of the unique contribution of what church does and a focus on that, and a sense of the importance of Sunday morning worship and encouragement towards spiritual depth and people who are open-minded and all these different things that I thought were kind of the best of what Unitarian Universalism had to offer. And I found it at Sugarloaf. So that was the good news. The bad news was that because Sugarloaf was perennially 100 people, it was always struggling. And a lot of our churches struggle, but this church struggled always in the way that small churches struggle. They wanted to have full-time ministry, but they couldn't afford it. They wanted to have more RE staffing, but they couldn't afford it. they were trying to afford a very beautiful and extensive piece of property that took up more than half of their budget. And so over the course of time, it just got to be wearing on all of us to be, instead of being able to focus on the kind of Unitarian Universalism that I thought really could make a difference in not only the lives of the people that came, but all the lives that they intersected with. Instead, we did things like we talked about the refinancing or the roof needing repair. And people literally came to our doors looking for Unitarian Universalism, having discovered it, and looking for a spiritual community. And what we mostly did was try to get them on the board as fast as we could so they could figure out how to fix the roof. And so as a minister, I got very weary of having people looking for bread and me being complicit in giving them stones. I wasn't interested in creating a worship environment where mostly what we did was try to keep our own place alive. And I couldn't believe that according to a model that I felt like I had understood from training and from Unitarian Universalism as well, that our church was a failed church because it hadn't been able to get up to a level of size that was functioning. I thought that the particular spark and genius of this congregation was being wasted in the model that we were forced to work in. And so when I started realizing that, and then I saw an opportunity to start working with congregational life staff as a way of talking about partnerships, of really talking about small church and whether we're running them the way we would like most usefully run them, I jumped at the opportunity. Because when I came to this world of congregational life folks who were working with other small churches around the country, we learned something. We learned that a lot of our small churches actually can represent Unitarian Universalists' greatest hope. We know that when we start thinking about 21st century church, that there's certain qualities to it that small churches have and that our bigger churches are actually struggling to find. So one is, people are in a disconnected world where they don't feel like they know their neighbors and they don't feel like they are really seen. And what is more evident in a small church than being seen, welcomed, and known, right? So that's something a unique contribution that small churches can offer to a world that is hurting in exactly the same way. Another thing that I personally loved about Sugarloaf was how flexible and nimble we were. We were almost always the same people in every meeting, and so if we decided we needed to do something with the limited resources we had, we made that happen. We didn't have to go through a whole discussion with a whole bunch of small group facilitated, like focus group stuff. We just did stuff that needed to be done, and we did it right away. And one of the things we know about 21st century church is that flexibility and an ability to change is going to be one of the most important features of it. So when we couple that perspective with the knowledge that 69% of our Unitarian Universalist congregations have under 160 members, 69%. I got that. I checked that number again with Tandy Rogers this morning, and she said yes. And we believe half of our congregations have under 100 members. We have an opportunity here. 69% of our congregations have under 160 members. And 50% under 100. It would be a shame for us to not utilize the basic skills and ability of our small congregations, which are already the majority of our congregations, to help all of Unitarian Universalism usher in a new era of religious life that we know is already upon us. And when we get into groups this size, one of the things we know is that our small congregations can't always send the same sort of representation as our mid-size and larger congregations. And so therefore we see decisions made and programming made for our larger congregations, which is great, but would take some degree of translation to work for smaller churches. So what is very evident for those of us on congregational life staff is that we are constantly working with small congregations that feel like they aren't enough, that have a sense of shame for having failed in some way, and that they are always under some degree of pressure to be more than they are, to be different than they are, or to be bigger than they are. we know that as long as we promote the idea that the only successful model of church is the full service model, which is when you have weekly worship every single week on Sunday morning, when you have full-time ministry staff, full-time RE staff, you have or are working towards your own building, and you're making some effort to actually save the world. When we know as long as we're promoting just the full service model church as the only acceptable model, then our many, many communities filled with connection and love and care and impact feel like they're failing. We want to change that. We don't think that's accurate or fair, and the longer that we act like it is accurate or fair, then the more of a disservice to Unitarian Universalism we're offering. So we're here to, we hope, relieve you of this burden of full-service church as the only acceptable model of church. We also are aware, some of you were in my earlier workshop, but we're aware of how tiring it is to be working in a small church oftentimes. And the first thing we want you to hear is that you are perfectly deserving of our love and gratitude just the way you already are. We want you to leave here with a sense of hopefulness that your congregation can not only survive the way you are, but thrive and become a more healthy and vibrant small congregation. And now to do just that,
all right, I'm gonna, Megan mentioned 21st Century Church, and I'm going to set some background for us here, because there have been ways in which small congregations struggle throughout our history, but there are some particular factors happening in the 21st century that really impact our congregational life, especially in small churches. So let's just pull the curtain back a little bit and look at the bigger landscape that our churches are living in. So in the last generation or generation and a half or so, we have seen some dramatic changes in the religious landscape in the United States. The first one here is around inherited versus chosen churches. It used to be that people would go to the same church that their parents went to, that their grandparents went to, that their great-grandparents went to. It was sort of handed down through the family. We've become a much more transient society, so we tend not to live where we grew up necessarily. So people who move to new cities may be looking for new churches and may or may not choose the same denomination as the one that they grew up in. There's a lot more church shopping. So just because you were raised by Unitarian Universalists, that's not a guarantee that your children are going to become Unitarian Universalists. Of course, we know that technology, information, and communication has changed dramatically, and this has an impact on congregational life in a number of ways. Not least of which is I hear from ministers and religious educators especially that their work has changed so dramatically, because they used to be able to just put a notice out in the weekly announcements or in the newsletter and everyone would get the information. Now we have to put it out on the website. We have to put it in the newsletter. We have to send a text message if you want to get anything to the youth group. Everybody's got these different ways of communicating. Church attendance patterns. Has anyone noticed that not everybody is showing up every Sunday? Yeah. So there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is around Title IX. This is not something you would think would have anything to do with church life, but when soccer. Yeah, so when Title IX was passed and athletics were made more available to women and girls, our communities didn't double the number of playing fields they had to work with. So what they had to do was to schedule games on Sundays. Exactly. So it's not possible for all of our people to be with us for that and a number of other reasons. You've heard of the spiritual but not religious movement. Okay, so there's less, people feel they have less influence of owning. There's less influence connected to owning a denominational relationship. That's not universally true across the country. Anyone here from the South? Is the first question you get asked, what church do you belong to? Yeah. So that's very much alive in the southern region. I'm aware of that, but and the Midwest as well. Good to know. I'm a New Englander, so we're different. But even in New England, there used to be. It wasn't uncommon that in your community, the people who served on city council or in government or in institutions all went to the same church, and they made connections there. We don't have that kind of connection to our denominational identity as a nation anymore. And of course, we're in the middle of a generational handover as our baby boomers are retiring at a rate of, I think it's 10,000 per day, something like that. A lot of our structures in our churches were built when those baby boomers were young parents and young adults, and often had one person not working full-time outside the home. So there was more time that those folks had to devote to volunteering in church and participating in church in different ways. It's very much different now. Most families that have two parents, most of them are working two jobs at least. Some of them have to work on Sundays, which is another reason why they're not with us. And the reality is that the next generation, Generation X, is about half the size of the baby boomer generation. So raise your hand if you ever have trouble finding volunteers for stuff. Right? Because as the baby boomers are retiring, there just literally are not enough bodies to take over those volunteer spots and those, to inhabit those systems that we created in the last century. The millennials are about the same size as the baby boom generation, but they're not ready to step into that leadership yet. So that's got implications for all of our work. And then even beyond this, we are in the middle of a 500-year shift. The theologian Phyllis Tickle, I was looking at you because I was forgetting her name. The theologian Phyllis Tickle wrote a book called Emerging Christianity, in which she identified that every 500 years or so, the world of church, capital C church, goes through a seismic shift where everything about it changes and everything about the role of church in society has changed. And the last time that happened was when Martin Luther hung his theses on the church door in Germany, and that was in 1517. Like almost exactly 500 years ago from today. So we're in the middle of a huge shakeup happening. We have no imagination for what it's going to look like in 100 years. No more than Martin Luther expected us to be sitting here. So it's hard to plan for what we don't know is coming. But if things are feeling hectic and chaotic in your congregation, there are some really good reasons for it. And as Megan said, we do want to set you free in light of all of these things that are not your fault and we can do nothing about. We release you from the expectation that you should be a miniature version of the perfect 1950s 150-member church. We release you from the idea that there is only one way to do church, and that is to do all the things that a full-service church does. And release you most of all from that nagging sensation that somebody out here knows how to do it, and if they would just give me the secret, I would do it here too. There's no one right way. And we do hear that many of you are tired. Raise your hand if you're tired. Let the record show a lot of hands are being raised. And we want you to know, as Megan says, that we see enormous hope in you, and we want you to leave here feeling that you have a hopeful role to play in our future, because as things are shifting so dramatically, you are the engines of innovation. It's in your small congregations that you can activate change more quickly than some of our larger institutions. You can try things out. You can experiment, then the rest of us can learn from it. So this is why we are investing so much hope in you and for our future. Imagine what you might be able to do if you freed yourself up from the idea that your church has to do everything. Now, what your congregation is called to do, and all you have to be, is just authentically who you are, the best possible version of yourself. And that's going to be the best way that you will manifest your church's purpose in the world. So what is this purpose, you might ask? So what I'm about to do is to tell a room full of Unitarian Universalists what your purpose is. No wordsmithing allowed. Your purpose is to bring the love and grace of Unitarian Universalism to your people, your community, and to our world. That's it. Thank you. This has always been the purpose of church, I think. It's to form individual souls who will go out and transform the world toward beloved community. This is our purpose. This is our reason for being. And how you manifest that purpose is going to be unique to your specific context and your congregation. And Megan's going to talk more about that.
So how do you do this? There may be as many ways to do it as there are people in this room, or at least communities in this room, right? And so what I want you to do when you hear some examples of other congregations that have found at least today's version or this year's version or this decade's version of how they're bringing love and grace of Unitarian Universalism to the world, I don't want you to think, oh, okay, that's what we can do. That sounds pretty good. I'm going to bring that home and implement that model. What I want you to do instead is see in the story how those folks assessed themselves and where their joy was, where their love is, where their passion is, and where their energy is, and how they saw the neighborhood they were living in and what was needed there, and how they combined those two things to create a new vision for what they were about to do. The answer will be as unique as your congregation is. And I think, I don't want to jump the gun too much. I probably am going to. But one of the ways we're describing this is that your mission can be extremely narrow. If you were in my last workshop, I called that, it's okay to be weird. So when you start thinking, what is it that we really love? How can we really be in the world? You want to start thinking of being real honest and being real clear and giving yourself permission to be as weird as you are, or as unique as you are. I think unique probably is a better word here. I think a lot of this has to do with gut, and so that's another thing. You know, it's said that Unitarian Universalists like to live in their head, not in their heart. I don't know if that's true or not. But in this case, we're going with the gut. And I think if you take a minute, even if you've been fighting this for 300 years, your gut can tell you where there's energy and where there's not energy, right? So think about a time where you've had a congregational conversation and the room was just getting... And then something slightly changed. You made some decision, and the room got like this. I remember in my home congregation long ago, we were trying to decide when the minister's sabbatical should be, and there was some anxiety about her going on sabbatical at all. And they made a very subtle change. They moved her sabbatical to be like April through August instead of later in the year where it would go into the next year. And all of a sudden, the whole board, like shoulders back, deep breath. Oh, this little thing made it okay. So that's the kind of change, the gut check change. So what you're asking the gut is, what brings excitement and energy for you and for those in your congregation? So that's the first question. What brings, when you think of energy and excitement, or just energy, love in your congregation, what comes to mind? I'm going to ask you to turn to your neighbor and just tell them the one thing, just go with your gut, the one thing in your congregation that brings energy and excitement to you. So that was maybe a specific thing that causes energy. And now I want you to shift for a minute and think about the thing that causes you dread. I'm going to give you 1 minute to take a deep breath and be like, let the cone of like secret honesty fall upon you. The thing that brings you dread can be huge, and it seems like you can't ever admit it or live without it, but it still causes you dread. So be honest and turn to your neighbor and tell them what that one thing is that causes you dread in your congregational life. You know, it's great. I don't think it's just that you learned that I'm bossy. I think you actually wanted to talk about the dread less than you wanted to talk about the excitement. And that's good. That's good, right? Because the thing that excites you is exactly the direction you want to go in. Even if it's something so small as, well, we can't think of a thing that we actually really, really like about this church, but, we just can't stop having these darn Sunday potlucks. Or there's no way we'd ever give up the Blueberry Festival that we put on every year, which I think actually happens in Kennebunkport, Maine. So I'm not sure. I'm not saying that that's their thing they love, but they don't stop doing it. So what's the thing? And that's kind of a two-part question, right? So that reaction you just had, especially if you were super honest about it, is going to be the thing that's going to start your thinking and your conversation about it. So with that, we're going to start hearing about some other places and some other ways in which they felt energy and moved away from the dread.
Okay, these are a couple of examples of how people did just that, just what Megan just described. Did that gut check about what is it that we do and that we love to do and brings us energy, and they've decided to put all their energy there. The pictures on this slide are from a congregation of ours up in Vermont. It's called North Chapel, I believe. And they were a green sanctuary, and they loved to feed people. They did food hospitality really well. So what they did was decide that that's what they're going to do. And they built a permaculture garden on their property. So the lawn is now landscaped as a permaculture garden, flowers and vegetables, and they partnered with a local elementary school to do this work. And you can see in the picture on top, there's some elementary school kids on one of the field trips. They come to the garden throughout the year. And then they built a pizza oven, brick oven in the back of the church. So they can feed themselves, but they can also feed their neighbors in that spot. So that's one example of a church that really honed in on what mattered to them and the skills and gifts that they had, and found a way to serve their neighbors with it and through it. Another example I don't have any pictures for, but it's a very small congregation in Pennsylvania. And a couple of years ago, there was a really serious flooding emergency that happened in their area. There were a lot of people who were displaced, a lot of property damage, one of those real crisis moments in the community. And members of this little tiny small church felt really helpless. Their church was okay. It was in the part of the city that didn't get flood damage, but they really were aching for their neighbors and thought, what could we do? And someone had the idea of changing the question from what can we do to what do we do? What is the thing that we do really well? And it's an improbable answer. But their answer was, we bake pies. We bake pies. That's what they do. And that's what they did. They got together and they baked pies, and they brought them around to people who were displaced, to the first responders, and to people who were in shelters while they were waiting to go back and evaluate their property. And this was not just, a school bake sale. This was ministry. This is ministry of compassion. This is ministry of solidarity. So when they say to themselves, now, we're the church that bakes great pies, it's more than just a description. It's deep spirituality. It's deep theology for them. Now, again, we don't want to limit what is possible for you only to the stories of things that other people have tried already. But it just gives you a sense of how people can hone in on what they do best and do good work with it. So back to reinforce what Megan said, whatever excites you, go do it. Whatever drains you, stop doing it. So it's easy enough to think about, what do I do that I love, that I can want to do more of, but how do you stop doing things that drain you? Because the Blueberry Festival has been here since, Ethel started it in 1922. So we can't stop it. Yeah. So I want to just give you a tool for thinking about letting go of some of the things that are not serving your current mission and purpose in the world. Anne? I do have some handouts for these, so if you want to take one home afterwards, you can come up and get one. Because I think it's nice to go home with a tool that you may be able to use. So this is what I call my housekeeping tool. And the way you would use it is get together with your folks in your congregation and just make a giant list of all the things you do every year as part of your church. Make a really exhaustive list on big pieces of newsprint. Usually it'll fill up 2 or 3 pages. The Sunday worship, faith formation, music, choir, chorus, the Christmas pageant, all of those things. and put them all down on a list. Now, you see that heart in the center of the pyramid. The heart is your core. That's your mission. That's who you are as a gathered people. So you then look at all of the things on your list, and you decide which of the things on the list are the things that directly align with that heart in the middle, with our core purpose. Those are the things that you keep, and you put all of those up in the top triangle there. Those are the things you don't do without because they are serving your purpose and moving you forward. Anything else on the list is up for grabs. Some of the stuff on the list might be things that you still value, but maybe they're not working efficiently. Maybe they take too many volunteer hours. Like maybe the Christmas pageant is an example. Maybe you have an elaborate Christmas pageant that takes 60 hours of rehearsal and 20 hours of tailoring time to come in and fix the angel wings on the back of the kids. And maybe you can just find a way to do a Christmas pageant that's just a little more streamlined, so you can keep something you value but adapt it. Or maybe it's something that you don't have volunteers for anymore, but you might have a partner in the community who would be willing to partner with you. For example, the guest at your table boxes. Maybe you can't find anyone to arrange to put those damn boxes together. Ooh, I didn't mean to cuss. I'm sorry. But maybe there's a local food bank that has volunteers that would like to help you with that project. So all of those things go in the adapt triangle, and then as you are able to adapt them, then you add them back into your program. And then there are things that are on the list that you can feel free to release, that maybe they served you really well and they were really important for a particular time in your congregation's history, but it's time to say thank you for that service, and letting go of it will help us to do something that will align more closely with that heart in the center. So this is one way to create space for discernment, especially if you're going to try to narrow focus, try to narrow down and hone in on what you guys do best and how to build your congregational identity based on that. All right. I think, Megan, are you next? I think you are.
So this little segment, that third hand would be useful. This segment is on conflict. Just a little word to conflict. So there's two kinds of conflict, right? So you're going to want to change things and talk about values, and I guess you could call the disagreements or different ideas or the diversity of opinion, you could call that conflict. You should anticipate that you will hopefully have people who feel strongly and who have different opinions, and be prepared for how you want to handle that. There are some tools out there that are useful, and your congregational life staff is always at the ready to help you with healthy conversations that involve a lot of difference and passion, because we know that passion and difference are actually what Unitarian Universalism is all about. There is also another kind of conflict, which is that some part of your congregation has a bit of what we might call a stranglehold on process and healthy decision-making, and that happens a lot. Don't feel bad if that's the case. I would say that's often the case. And if you need someone to help come in and have some honest conversations about either poor behavior or lack of communication skills or something to that effect, if your response to all of this is, this will never work at my place because of X, then you might be in that category. And so, again, congregational life staff are ready to come in and help you with an honest conversation. And we want to assure you that these changes can happen if there's will to make them happen. So developing the will is kind of the thing that needs to be done on your end. I also want you to acknowledge that there are fears and legitimate feelings that keep us from making decisions or changes, not the least of which, actually we like church the way we've been doing it and we just want it to work. Like, that's real. And also I want to acknowledge that people think of their church as their home a lot of times, especially in small church. And your home is kind of when you start thinking home, sanctuary, family a little bit, then you start getting into, hey, the world's a scary place, and I'd prefer my home sanctuary family to be less scary. And one of the ways I can mitigate scariness is by locking this stuff down so we never change anything. And I'm very sympathetic to that. but also that's not going to work. So I think acknowledging that that's not going to work and taking some community deep breaths and replacing that fear and that desire to lock down with a real hopeful vision for who you can be that really acknowledges actually the core of who you are and the core of what you love would be more helpful than trying really hard not to change, because we know actually trying hard not to change is not, the world does not agree with our human desire to not change at all. You can acknowledge the risks of doing something versus not doing something. You can have a real honest conversation. If we risk doing this thing, what do we win, what do we lose? If we don't do this thing, what do we win and what do we lose? And I bet if you're real honest about that, you'll see that it makes a lot of sense to try the new thing and not stick with the old. And I want to have you ask yourselves, how bad does it have to get before you will act? I've seen congregations, I cannot believe that they are still a congregation, that they meet weekly, that they ever want to intersect with each other at all. So how bad does it have to get before you will act? If you're going to have to act anyway, even if that time is, some of our congregations have endowments that will allow them to be like this for another 50 years. Is that how we bring love and grace of Unitarian Universalism to our world? I'm going to ask you to not postpone the inevitable, even if the inevitable might fall on someone else's shoulders. Why don't you, let's be bold and brave and do the inevitable things now. And I want to kind of flip it, because it's easy to be afraid of the change, but I've started to do some of this work with congregations, and the way you start it, by the way you find the common sense of what your congregation is for, is by starting to talk about what you love in the congregation. Why do you show up no matter what? Why are you so tired because you've dedicated your life to working here? Why do you keep doing that? It makes you feel happy. People get energized talking about it. It will bring you a sense of joy and peace and happiness to have these conversations. So even though it might seem abstractly scary, in the reality and in the way you live it out, it actually is fun and joyful and easy to get started doing. And then once you have a sense of what you're for and what you love, you can make that your guiding light. And then the rest of the conflict and other stuff is a little bit easier to swallow because you've got that going on. If it's a real quick question, we can do it, but...
Could you give us some examples of tackling the inevitable?
The broad-based answer I would give to that is if you know that your structure of church is not sustainable now, and your plan is to grow into a different kind of church, but that's been your plan for a real long time, and it hasn't happened. So an honest assessment about whether that's likely to happen in the future or whether it's time to make a change into a different model of church now, I guess would be my workshop level answer. If you were calling me in my capacity as congregational life staff, I could give you a longer answer, but it wouldn't be much different than that. It might just have more details.
So conflict is going to happen when people are in community. That is just a natural part of life. It's a natural part of congregational life. I want to give you another tool that you can use that you maybe don't even know you have. This is from the book, Doing the Math of Mission by Gilbert Rendell. And in it, he says, conversation is the currency of change. What we invite people to talk about, to think about, to pray about, determines the path that we will follow into the future. And as leaders, I assume you all are the leaders in your congregation because you're here. Leaders have the power of the agenda. You have the responsibility of determining what a congregation will focus on by giving time and attention to a conversation. And I do have handouts of this as well, so if you want to take those home. And I do recommend Rendell's book, Doing the Math of Mission. It's a good read. So he says in this book that there are 3 kinds of leadership conversations that you can invite people into. The first is called a maintenance conversation, and that focuses primarily on just maintaining and sustaining how things are going. So these are important conversations to have on some level because you have to keep the lights on, you have to keep the building heated, all of those things are under maintenance conversations. A second kind of conversation you can invite people to is preferential. So these kind of conversations focus on satisfying people, making people feel comfortable and at home. And again, these are important conversations to have, right? So either it's focused on the people who we already are, like how do we take care of ourselves and make ourselves feel comfortable here? Or it could focus on the people that you're trying to bring into your church, like, oh, we got to get those millennials, so let's hire an electric guitarist for Sunday music. So those are preferential conversations. And finally, there are the missional conversations. And these really focus on taking us outside of who we are today and into a future that we want to see ourselves live into. So as leaders in your congregation, it's important for you to know that you've got the power to use these conversations to invite people to talk about these things. There'll be times and places where you have to do the maintenance stuff, but really be strategic about how you can invite people to have the missional focus and missional conversations, and invite people to talk about how they see themselves as part of this gathered community and what they can contribute to the mission, what they can contribute to bringing the love and grace of your church to the world. So this is a time of reflection, because this is a picture that reflects. So we want to ask you to just reflect briefly with a neighbor. How would you describe your church? We had a couple examples earlier. We're the church that bakes great pies, or we're the Green Sanctuary Church. So how would you, if somebody came up to you in an elevator and said, "Tell me about your church," you would just say, "We are the blank people. We are the church people." How would you describe yourself? So turn to a neighbor that you don't. Right. Let's see. Let's hear a couple of examples. What did you hear from a neighbor? I'll just ask for a few people to just shout out some answers. What did you hear from your neighbor? Go ahead. Okay, they didn't know because they're still trying to do everything and everyone has their own opinion. I once heard that if you have a congregation of 300 people, you've got 450 opinions. They're the church that welcomes people who don't fit elsewhere. All right, great. Who else? Go ahead.
Church of open-hearted and broken-hearted people.
Church of open-hearted and broken-hearted people. I love that. It's beautiful. Yes.
I think we have a church that's willing to take risks.
A church that's willing to take risk. See, I told you. We love you guys. Yes.
We too had saying social justice churches.
The social justice church. Good.
We are the love people.
We are the love people. Amen. Amen. Great. So you can see that in a world that is so overfull of stimulation, 24-hour news cycle, internet, tweets, our attention span is so divided and torn in so many directions. You see the power of having just that simple statement, right? And how much ministry you can hang on a simple statement like, we're the love people. Beautiful. So right now we're going to give you an extended version of how this has worked in real life. And Darcy Hall is going to come up and talk with you. She is from the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Essex County. Did I get that right? It does, yeah. Woo. And she's going to talk a little bit about faith and works.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay. I'm from the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Essex County in Orange, New Jersey. Just a really quick thumbnail about the church. It's 125 years old. It's an urban environment. We own the building, which is a curse and a blessing, as I'll talk about. We also own a large Victorian house right next door, and it's surrounded by green space, which in this urban environment is really unusual. And we did a little research and found out that our church was founded around the time that in the city of Orange was growing and expanding. It was after the Civil War. And we are an anchor institution among many that were founded back then. And we're still here, which is kind of amazing, as you'll see when I tell my story. So my husband and I have been there for about 25 years. And I don't remember the numbers, but there was a slow decline in membership. You know, there was 125. There was 100. There were 75. There were 50. There were 35. One day there's no choir. There's no RE. There are very few people. So I should also explain that we are positioned between two powerhouse churches, Montclair and Summit. And so the sort of affluent UU demographic is going to go to those churches. Our church is in a lower economic strata community. Anyway, so we started running out of people, but we had our space. So we started renting our considerable available space. So in Orange, there are vibrant immigrant communities. There's a large African American community, and so we were renting to Pentecostals, more traditional conservative religious groups who would, we understand, we would preach about hellfire and brimstone or whatever, and we would sort of sit there and say, well, they don't represent our UU values, but we'll take their money. How are we going to survive? We'll take your money. And we didn't really think about that too much. We didn't really make that connection. Anyway, so as the church shrank and shrank, we began a process of having to face the future. We were getting smaller. So I just want to say something, which you've already kind of said, but I have the real-life examples of the dynamics of a small, failing church. People are afraid to confront people on tensions and problems, because if you say something to somebody, they will get mad at you and they will leave. And then you have one less body to do the coffee, one less body to do whatever. So this atmosphere develops, which is tense, depressed, and is really the opposite of a welcoming church. It's like, you come twice. Can you do coffee hour next week? Not a welcoming situation. And, you know, every situation is different. But at some point, our board meetings basically became the roof is leaking, or there's a contract issue with a tenant. And we basically realized that we have become slumlords. We are renting a dilapidated building to poor people. And we're like, that is not representing our UU values. So we really had to confront that. Now, we did have the money. Now it's funny, because, of course, I'm a dinosaur, so I hand wrote this, unlike everybody else with their computers. So I said we have money because of the rentals, which I meant to write gave us boldness, but this looks like gave us badass. So we're very badass over there in Orange. And we began a process of exploration and somewhat confronting our problems, our fears, our conflicts, all those things you don't want to confront and you hope will go away, and the next generation who have the endowments will deal with, not you. So we had many meetings, many types of visionings and meetings and all sorts of things where we said, do we want to continue traditional parish ministry? For a lot of complicated reasons I won't go into, no. For us, no, not happening. If you want traditional parish ministry, you're going to go to Montclair or you're going to go to Summit. You're not going to come to Orange. That was our lived experience. Another option was to give up. We considered that pretty seriously. And there were people who wanted to vote the church out of existence. We spent a lot of time studying our bylaws, and we thought, no, we do not want to give the money to the UUA. No, they will not get our money. No. So after close bylaw study, seriously, I was joking, of course, but seriously, we really felt wow, our UU values, we are exceptional. We are unique. We are special. We are in an urban environment. We can live our social justice values. We just don't know how to do it, right? So giving up, no, we did not want to give up. So we thought, okay, we have to be something different, just like you were saying. Okay, we have to come up with something different that works for us. So we were very fortunate that we have our board president member, a woman named Mindy Fullilove. Mindy is a professor at Columbia School of Public Health. She is a doctor. She's a psychiatrist. And she has written books, the most well-known of which I think is Root Shock, which is focused on how communities have suffered through racism and government programs that cut up communities. And she has kind of a theory sort of about how if the buildings are sick, if the town is sick, it's like the people can't be healthy. So she has a kind of highly developed vision of urban spaces and how to heal them. And so she presented us with some ideas about trying to transition into something that would work with the community. So a lot more about that in a minute. Anyway, so I just wanted to talk about all those meetings that we had, okay? Because you will have meetings where your church members will come, and you will find, meetings, of course, should be led by a very well-informed board of trustees, or we had outside facilitators who were kind of neutral presences. And we found that at these meetings, there were a small number of us who were keeping the church running. So what happens at these meetings about shutting down the church? People come out of the woodwork. Yeah, okay, some of you are nodding. And they give impassioned speeches about how much this church meant to me 50 years ago, and why can't we do that now, and we need to help the kids, what kids, where, and you listen, you are respectful of this person, and you just let it go. You let it go. We are not going to be the church of your childhood. We're sorry, but, that's not going to happen. Then we also got people who came in and hadn't been in church in 15 years or 10 years, and they were like, well, that minister who was here 10 years ago, he said something really mean about Hillary Clinton, so, that's why I never came back. And you're just like, okay, so you've been holding that anger against us for 10 years. Okay, thank you. Let it go. Yeah. There will always be people who will say, why didn't I know? This is your third meeting? No one told me. I didn't know. Why are you talking about this? So you just have to be, if you're the board or whoever's doing this, you have to be very on top of your communication, use all media, get the word out, have very clear agendas, whatever your proposals, your resolutions, just be really clear about it, because there will always be people who, no one told me, and they hold everything up, and, anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So now, if you are lucky, there will be a few crazy individuals who will want to not give up and who will be brave enough to face the future. So what did we do as a small community to keep going? What did we figure out? Because as you said, we had to figure something out, obviously. So I think a big insight for us as a group was we had to go back to our 7 principles, right? That we are not running a church because we want to go through mechanical representations of singing a hymn or hearing a sermon because that's what a church is supposed to do, right? Exactly what you were saying, right? We don't want to be the perfect church when it's sort of hollow and just going through the motions because it's what we're supposed to do. However, we want to be a success in sharing our UU values where we believe they could be of use, they could be of value. So we looked around at the community that we were in, which is a vibrant community with a large Haitian population, a Latino population, African American population, an African population, and many, many other immigrant groups. And when you look around, there are a lot of assets. Okay, it's not what are you lacking that we can bring to you, what do you have that we can support, that we can help strengthen. So there's a lot of joy. There are a lot of very hardworking people. And how can we add to that? Not what can we bring to help you, because we have the answers. What do you have? So we looked at shared interests, right? That in our community of Orange, our church and the people around have a lot of shared interests. Another thing that we did is we looked at our tenants. Remember, we're landlords. And instead of sort of seeing them as like, oh, these people who have these, conservative religious values or something, it was really like, okay, let's actually, have dinner. Let's actually meet these people. Let's actually talk to people. Can we help you? Can we provide child care during your service, right? How can we connect with you? So it's like we had the same circumstances, but we just looked at it differently. So anyway, through a lengthy process of visioning, meeting, talking, and informing, we decided, and actually have done this, to create a 501c3 nonprofit that's like a subsidiary of our church. So this is called Hub, and I was told that I must tell you that Hub is spelled, yes, H-U-U-B. Yeah, the Hub. And so what we like to say is that we don't have a congregation, but we have a place where people congregate. We like to say that. Saying that this is that we're developing a community center doesn't really capture it somehow. We are trying to use our most valuable asset, which is our buildings, and use those as places where social justice activities can take place, where people can find joy, where people can be in a safe space, where people can do meaningful things in their lives. So a couple things we did is we had to restructure the people. A very difficult decision is there's no minister. We don't have a minister. That money that would go towards a minister is paying for a property manager. That sounds very unsexy, a property manager. But we have a very special property manager. He is also a grant writer and a personable young man who is out in the community meeting people, making contacts, and doing all sorts of good things, one of which I'll talk about in a few minutes. To address the needs of our remaining congregants who ask, well, isn't this church? We have had lay-led services once a month to address that. Our 501c3 hub, we have created a board. So we're doing this in a very legal, proper way. And the board of Hub, the subsidiary organization, is out there making contacts, meeting people in Orange, getting to know, different groups, different churches, political things, all sorts of things that we never had time to do before. Okay, because before we were like, okay, who's got the coffee pot for coffee hour that there are 7 people at? Okay, so our energy is used in a much better way now. It was funny, when you were asking if people were tired, I did not raise my hand for the first time in about 10 years. Because I am not tired, I am energized by this. So that is I noticed that. So you might be wondering, well, what kind of things have we done? What am I talking about? As we try to use our most valuable asset, our buildings. This was very exciting. We had a youth-led mayoral debate at our church. And actually, it was the only debate where all the candidates for the mayor of Orange appeared. It was in like the newspapers. It was like a real event. It was very exciting. No, I'm serious. Actually, this was genuinely initiated by a group of young people called the Radical Movement or something. We also participate in the newly formed Orange Interfaith Council, where some of the board members of Hub go out and meet with the ministers of the other churches, which, again, in a previous time, we might have been a little bit like, well, what do we have in common with those guys? But no, we have a lot of shared interest that we didn't know we had. Another thing that we're doing right now, I could go on and on, I'll just keep it short, is we are in discussions to have a Muslim congregation use our church because they have had a hard time finding anybody who wants them. So we are in discussion to have them use our space. We have a gentleman who is leading English classes for Haitian immigrants, which has hundreds of people. And also, I must also tell you a very moving story. There was a tragedy in Orange recently where a young black man was shot in an episode of gun violence, and the family did not have the resources to, really put on like a funeral. So there was going to be a funeral at the YMCA, but at the last minute, the Y was worried about the implications or the crowds or whatever. So our property manager got wind of this, and very quickly, through some phone calls and connecting and talking to people and people who knew people, he arranged in a very short timeline to have this young man's funeral at our church. So there were about 150 people there, and as you can imagine, the family was incredibly appreciative. And it was a very powerful and moving event. That is something that in our previous incarnation as tired small church people, that could never have happened. We just wouldn't have known about it, and we wouldn't have been able to make things happen that fast. But so that was something where we really felt we are expressing our UU values in that event, being able to support and give space for that event. So that was recently. That was like a couple months ago. So I'm just going to close by saying that we have a big, exciting event coming up that maybe some of you can attend, which is we are giving a conference on November 12th, which is being called the 100-Year-Old House, because some imaginative, clever person made the connection between the fact that our church is about 100 years old, 125, and it's kind of lovingly falling apart, although we're always trying to fix it up. A lot of the houses in Orange are about 100 to 125 years old, and people are trying to fix them up. And a lot of the institutions and buildings are kind of in that same condition. So at our conference, we are going to kind of mix in some theoretical, academic, urban stuff, along with sort of reaching out to the community for sort of practical workshops on, how to fix a leaky faucet or how to fix things in your 100-year-old house. So that, again, is a kind of an imaginative and creative way to try to bring together our building, the city, us, and people in it, and how we can actually do something to help people. So that's what we're doing in Orange. I hope to come and visit someday. Thank you.
Well, that's the first time I've heard you speak, Darcy. I'm going to New Jersey, for sure. We have about 8 minutes left or so. So if there are folks that have some questions or comments, we can take a few of them. Please do use the microphone because it's being audio recorded. So, go ahead.
I have a question for Darcy. I loved your story, and I'm wondering if the two affluent UU congregations have noticed you yet.
Yes.
If you have a conversation with them, I would think they would rejoice in what you're doing and want to help you out a little bit.
Is there anybody here from Montclair? No. Actually, a couple of years ago, we had a plan to join or partner with Montclair. There were many conversations. It's a wonderful congregation, but eventually they decided that they didn't want us because of our buildings. So that's very interesting, and I actually never thought about that before. That is our most valuable asset, but that is also can be a curse. So the quick answer to your question is we are now very actively partnering with other churches in the area. Thank you.
I'm Barb Gooch from the UU Fellowship of Salina, Kansas. We're a small fellowship of 50 members, and we're lay-led. And one of the things I yearn for most as the lay leader of that fellowship is to have some sort of network of colleagues, of lay leaders, and do something like they have ministers' days before regional and UUA General Assembly. And I think it would be very valuable to those of us who are lay leaders to have that same sort of connection. I also would hope for at some point that the UUA would recognize the importance of lay leaders for small congregations and develop a UUA-wide program like the Ohio Meadville has for commissioned lay leaders, because I think it's important for us as lay leaders to have some sort of recognition of our position and just some value added for what we do.
Absolutely, and as I said I've talked to you at the last workshop, that is on the radar for especially the Central East region as we hope to spread it's currently called, watch out for name change, Commission Lay Leader Program, and then we'll go from there. I think it dovetails well with conversations that we're having at the UU Ministers Association level about the sustainability and future of ministry, given how expensive it is, and eventually these two conversations are going to join together.
Hello, I'm Kim, and I'm from the UU Fellowship of Waynesboro, Virginia. And this question is for Barb, I think. Oh, no. Darcy. Nope, Darcy. Darcy, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the activities that happen between your fellowship hall and your 100-year-old house, and how those two different spaces have worked in this? Was I correct in understanding that you have two different spaces on your property?
Yes.
Okay.
And so your question is?
How do the activities that occur in each space, how are you working through the physical barrier of having two buildings on the same property? We face the same problem or opportunity.
Well, we try to rent them out as much as possible to make money off of them. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me try to frame that. We are focused on the church because that's where the action is, because that's a beautiful building.
Church, not the house.
Yeah, okay. And we talk about selling the house, but then we would lose the green space. And the green space in an urban environment is so valuable. So, when you have these old buildings, you have to prioritize. Okay. And we have to prioritize the church.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hope that's helpful.
I'm Bob Freer from the Gathering at Northern Hills in Cincinnati. And I've only been a Unitarian Universalist over a year because we just merged with the United Church of Christ. We had a man that came that spoke at our church from the Northern Hills Fellowship. And he saw that we had similar views, and we were a storefront church in downtown Cincinnati, an open and affirming church. And he said, why don't we merge with Northern Hills? And it was a 2-year process, but we have successfully completed the merger, and we have a very vibrant congregation. And we just initiated 15 new members in our new congregation.
That's a great story. And I also want to just mention, we're talking about buildings, and I want to just be clear that if your church decides to make a decision to sell the building, it doesn't mean that your church, you're not selling your church. Closing the building doesn't mean closing your church necessarily. There are other ways of meeting in rented spaces or having house churches, and call your regional staff because we have other stories we can share about that.
My name is Jim Jager. I'm the minister of the Open Circle UU Fellowship in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. We're about 60 members. And my question is, what do you see as the key role that a part-time minister, I'm only a quarter time, but that a part-time minister can fill in a small congregation like this? Some of the ideas where we might be more strongly involved.
You're going to hate this answer again and again, but it really depends on what the priorities of your congregation are. Quarter-time ministry, I assume they're hiring it for you for your unique ability to bring ministry skills. And if you're talking about quarter-time ministry, by the time you're done with any sort of preaching and pastoral care, you're at quarter-time. So I think you should be real about that, but that's valuable. They're hiring you or clergy to do something that can't be done by lay folks. aside from, debates about whether clergy and lay folks can do the same things. Not taking a side on that. But so I think understanding when you understand what the church's priorities are, then you can understand what your priorities are. And so if there is a little bit of wiggle room in your time to do the one extra thing that isn't pastoral care or sermonizing, then the church's sense of purpose will inform that. And if they don't have a sense of purpose, then I would say the one extra thing is finding one.
Yeah. Well, now on the question of what to do if you've got a second building on the property that's a problem, one of the congregations I've worked with, their solution was to tear it down and get some green space out of it.
There's more green space for you. Interesting. Yeah, and I also want to just really lift up. I also work in multi-site partnership work with the UUA. So, and merging isn't the only. Maybe that feels a little over the top. There's lots of steps all the way from buying toilet paper with your neighbors all the way to merging. And there's lots of interesting ways that you can bring what you have to offer to a neighbor, even a faraway neighbor, really, and ask what they have to offer and see if there's some commonalities. So we have some resources, a lot of resources on that too.
My name is Matt Parcher-Villarreal, and I'm from Arlington Unitarian Universalist Church in Arlington, Texas. We are about 35 members, lay-like congregation. My question is, we've been around for about 50 years, and for about 30 of those, the church has kind of been going along pretty much the way it always has been. And there's a younger generation now, like myself, that's moving into the church that's trying to inject new ideas to try to grow the life of the church. But the congregation is predominantly sort of older or aging, and they're open to the ideas, but we're running into sort of the, that would be great, but we're, too old, or that would be great if we had money, or... So how do you bridge sort of those kind of intergenerational issues, or sort of any ideas as to how to sort of, I guess, get on the same page so that we're working together to try to do something?
Yeah. It's 4:15 or 4:16 already, and so I'm going to have to give you a really short answer to that. So I'm not sure it's a complete answer. So my gut solution to that, I don't know if the old guard is letting the young people actually into leadership to do the work, or if they're kind of putting up a barrier to letting the younger folks, sure, we'll take your ideas and we'll bring that back to our discussion group. And if that's the case, then I would say having you and the younger folks trying to get in the leadership position so that you can show what it looks like would be a good way to go. I'm actually just going to take one more because it's already late. I'm sorry. Can you? That's you. So please.
I'm probably not the appropriate one. I want to be honest with you. I'm Darcy's mother. First of all, let me say that as her mother, I know how hard she and her husband Wayne have worked on this entire project. But one of the things that interests me very much is for total contrast, I'm a 50-year member of All Souls Unitarian Church in New York City, and where Darcy grew up. So it's like a totally different environment. But we do share one thing, and that is historic moments in the congregation. And I'm very aware that Darcy's church has a very historic moment in that church is where Norman Chapek became a Unitarian.
Really? Wow.
And somehow or other, I think there's a piece of us that doesn't want to let that go. Plus, there's a mural of Chapek in the church, if I'm correct. And so there's something beyond here than a church building that's 125 years old. And I really think, as president of the Historical Society of All Souls, and we're about to celebrate our 200th, and Murray Grove is about to just, celebrate its 250th of the landing of John Murray. we really ought to be thinking about our historic moments, and in some cases, extraordinarily valuable, not only financially, but just historically valuable artifacts, moments, stories that we have to tell. Yeah. And I wondered, if Darcy, have you gone to the Arts Association of New Jersey? Just what you wanted, right? Public advice from your mother.
From your mother.
Right?
This might be.
But I'm very proud of Darcy. I'm very proud of all the work she does.
I'm going to invite that conversation to take place over dinner at some point, since you know how to find. I'm going to let you have that conversation a little later over, family time. Yeah, exactly. Since you know how to find each other. But thank you for that. And I guess since I'm here, I'll just add that that part of thinking about who you are and what you love includes a look at your history. And it does not exactly mean that you have to keep every artifact of your history in order to honor that history, but maybe you can even make your history more real by learning about it, making it a living part of your understanding of yourself. So let me close up, since we're a little late, and, UUs like to be timely. Just with a quick benediction. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone.